You know, it's funny how history kind of repeats itself, doesn't it?
It really does seem to.
Like back in the 1840s, you had the telegraph system just exploding onto the scene. Revolutionary tech.
Spreading incredibly fast.
Yeah. And it feels really similar to that internet boom we all saw, what, a century and a half later?
Exactly the same dynamic. And almost immediately, the big question was security.
Right. Especially for the banks. They were early adopters, moving money, and they were, well, understandably worried.
They had to be. Transactions being intercepted, altered. That was a huge risk,
So they actually pioneered some of the first technical protections for these systems.
which really sets the stage for what we're talking about today. Security engineering.
That initial scramble, that immediate need for security the moment things get connected, that's the core, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The principle holds, connect systems, and security instantly becomes necessary. And today, it's not just wires.
Oh, not at all. It's the internet, connecting, well, everything, not just our computers anymore.
It's our phones, obviously, but think bigger.
Way bigger. We're talking refrigerators soon, maybe heart monitors, cars, transit systems, everything getting an IP address.
That's what our sources call this sort of third wave of connectivity.
Mm.
And it means that old school PC security, it's just not the full story anymore.
Not by a long shot. So for this deep dive, we're digging into Security Engineering v1.pdf and the big update, v3.pdf.
Yeah, these are pretty comprehensive guys. Real cornerstones in the field.
Our mission here really is to pull out the key ideas, the core principles, see how things have evolved.
Without getting totally lost in the weeds, hopefully.
Right. We want to give you those aha moments, a shortcut to understanding the really crucial concepts that keep our digital world, well, somewhat secure.
A streamlined path through some vital ideas.
Okay, so security engineering, huge topic. Where do we even start?
Well, the sources consistently point to one place as being fundamental. Security protocols.
Protocols. Okay, so these are like the rule books, the agreed upon ways systems talk securely.
Exactly. It's where the cryptography, the secret codes, meets access control, who gets to do what.
Like passwords, that's a basic protocol, I guess.
That's a very simple example, yeah. But the underlying mechanics can get much more involved. We'll definitely get into that.
So these protocols are the bedrock. They define how systems prove who they are and exchange info safely.
They're the precise digital handshakes, you could say, that establish trust.
The sources even show us the notation they use. It looks pretty cryptic at first.
They can, yeah.
Like the parking garage example. T-J-E-T, T-N-K-T.
Right. Let's break that down a bit.
Okay, so T is the token, maybe in your car key. G is the garage system.
Simple enough? T sends a message to G.
And the message has two parts. First, just the token's ID, T. Then there's this second part in curly braces.
That means it's encrypted, scrambled using a secret key, KT, that only the token and garage know.
And inside that encrypted part is the token ID again, T, plus this thing N and nonce.
The nonce.
Yeah.
Number used once. That's critical.
Why is that so important?
It prevents replay attacks. Imagine someone records your token sending the open signal.
Right. And then they just play it back later to get in for free.
Exactly. But the nonce stops that. Each time you use the token, it generates a new, unique nonce.
So if the garage gets a message with an old nonce it's already seen?
It knows it's a replay, not a legitimate request. Rejects it. It's like a one-time password for that specific interaction.
Okay, that makes sense. But it does seem kind of complex for just opening a parking barrier.
Well, and this is a key point the sources stress. Getting these protocols right, making them truly secure in the real world, it's hard.
Really hard, apparently. Initial designs often have flaws you don't see at first.
Things that look simple can be surprisingly easy to break.
And the examples of broken systems are, well, they're everywhere, especially with cars.
Oh, yeah. Those remote key fobs. A lot of them had serious issues between, say, 2005 and 2015.
The sources mentioned TI's DST transponder. It used a 40-bit key. That's tiny.
Way too short. Breakable, just by trying all the keys brute force? Apparently due to U.S. export controls at the time limiting key strength.
And even the newer DST-80 used in what? Fords, Toyotas, Hyundais still had problems.
Key management issues, like Hyundai keys barely having any real randomness.
And Toyota keys sometimes derivable just from the car's serial number. Ouch.
Yeah, not great. Then there was keylock, used in lots of garage doors and some cars too.
That could be cracked with just an hour's access to the key. Wow.
And some systems use really simple math. like XOR, to make unique keys from a master key.
So like one master key for a model and they just tweak it slightly for each car.
Yeah, but the tweak was so simple, if a thief got a couple of unique keys, they could work backwards to the master key.
And unlock potentially loads of cars. Scary stuff.
It really is. It highlights how seemingly small crypto flaws have big consequences.
Interestingly, the sources contrast this with Tesla.
Right. Being more software-based, they could often push out updates to fix vulnerabilities. Older manufacturers with physical keys couldn't do that easily.
It shows the real-world impact of weak protocols and crypto. We saw car crime go up because of relay attacks on keyless entry.
A direct result of not getting the protocol design right, not thinking about those kinds of attacks.
So, okay, that's what happens when it goes wrong. What does a better protocol look like? The sources use Kerberos as an example.
Kerberos, yes, a classic. It's a bit more involved, uses a ticket granting idea.
The notation is definitely more complex. A, B, then SA with a load of encrypted stuff, then A, B, then B, A.
Let's simplify. Alice A wants to use a service run by Bob.
B. Okay.
First, Alice talks to a trusted server. S. Think of it as the security guard. She says, I need to talk to Bob.
Got it. A requests access to B via S.
Right. The server S then creates a secret session key, KAB, just for Alice and Bob to use for this one conversation.
A temporary secret handshake.
Exactly. And the server creates a ticket. This ticket contains that session key and Alice's identity, but it's encrypted using Bob's secret key.
So only Bob can read it.
Correct. The server sends this ticket back to Alice. It also sends Alice her own copy of the session key, KAB, but encrypted using Alice's secret key.
So only Alice can read her copy. Makes sense.
Now, Alice wants to talk to Bob. She sends Bob two things. That encrypted ticket she got from the server.
Which Bob can decrypt because it uses his key.
And an authenticator. This is usually something like the current time encrypted using the new session key, KAB.
Ah, so she proves she has the session key that was inside the ticket?
Precisely. Bob decrypts the ticket, gets the session key, he decrypts the authenticator using that same key. If it decrypts correctly and the timestamp is recent, he knows Alice is who she says she is and that this is a fresh request.
And sometimes Bob sends something back, like the timestamp +1 encrypted with the session key.
Yeah, often as a final confirmation. TA +1 KAB. Shows Bob also has the key and understood the message.
Okay, the key idea there seems to be that trusted third party, the server S.
That's a huge part of it. Instead of everyone needing to trust everyone else directly, everyone just needs to trust the central Kerberos server.
And using time-sensitive tickets and session keys limits the damage if something gets compromised.
Absolutely. It narrows the window of opportunity for an attacker.
But even well-designed protocols like Kerberos aren't foolproof. There are common attack types.
Right. The sources list things like middle-person attacks.
Where someone sits between you and the server, relaying messages, maybe altering them.
Exactly. Or modification attacks, just changing message content.
Sure.
Reflection attacks, tricking a system into talking to itself in a harmful way.
And those replay attacks we talked about with the parking garage.
Yeah. And all these potential protocol flaws get much worse if the implementation is sloppy or if the underlying cryptography is weak.
It really drives home the point. Designing your own security protocols is risky business.
Very risky. Unless you're an expert and get rigorous peer review, you're likely leaving holes.
Like the keyless entry relay attacks show real consequences when protocol design gets neglected.
Definitely. Which leads us nicely into the building blocks themselves. Yeah. Cryptography.
Right. Crypto. Most people think. Secrecy. Keeping messages hidden.
And that's a big part of it, of course. Confidentiality. But the sources point out it's not the only goal.
Like military comms sometimes wanting signals that are hard to even detect. Low probability of intercept.
Exactly. Secrecy isn't always the main driver. Crypto gives us a toolkit.
What's in the toolkit besides secrecy?
Authentication proving identity. Integrity ensuring data isn't changed. Non-repudiation proving someone sent a message.
Okay. So the sources mention early authentication using test keys. Algebraic functions? Sounds old school.
It is, but the concepts connect to modern techniques. Think nuclear weapon controls or the block ciphers we use constantly.
Block ciphers? Like DES, data encryption standard.
Yeah, DES is a famous early example, developed partly for banking needs.
But also, interestingly, designed so it wouldn't totally cripple intelligence gathering.
That's the story, yeah. A balancing act between commercial security and national security interests. Fascinating history there.
So how do people try to break these block ciphers? Cryptanalysis.
Right. There are various methods. The sources mention linear and differential cryptanalysis.
Sounds complicated.
They are. Essentially, they look for statistical weaknesses, patterns. Relationships between the input, plain text, and the output, ciphertext, that shouldn't be there if the cipher were truly random.
Trying to find a shortcut to the key, basically.
Pretty much. A cipher is considered strong if the amount of text you'd need to analyze to find such a weakness is just impossibly large, more than all the text you could encrypt with one key.
Like an arms race between cipher designers and code breakers.
Always has been, always will be.
Okay, another tool mentioned is MAT's message authentication codes.
Right. Not about secrecy, but about integrity and authenticity. Did the message get changed? Did it come from the right person?
The sources mention using a block cipher in CBC mode cipher blockchaining. You process the message block by block.
And the encryption of each block depends on the one before it. Then you just keep the very last block.
And that last block is the MAC, like a fingerprint for the message.
Exactly. As long as the message length is fixed, it verifies integrity and authenticity. Very useful.
Then there are hash functions, digital shredders, kind of.
Good analogy. They take any input, big or small, and output a fixed size hash value, like a fingerprint.
And the key property is collision resistance. It should be practically impossible to find two different inputs that give the same hash output.
That's the ideal, yes. Finding a collision.
The sources mention the birthday paradox. You don't need to check as many inputs as you might think to find a collision.
Right, it's counterintuitive. For a hash function with n possible outputs, you only need about the square root of n hashes before you have a decent chance of finding two that match.
Which is important for things like digital signatures, right? You don't want someone finding another document that hashes to the same value as your legitimate one.
Absolutely critical. If collisions are easy to find, digital signatures become unreliable. An attacker could create a malicious document with the same hash as a harmless one you signed.
So for signatures, you hash the document, then encrypt that hash with your private key.
Pretty much. Anyone with your public key can decrypt the hash, rehash the document themselves, and see if they match. Proves integrity and authenticity.
But older hash functions like MD5 and SHA-1, they're not considered safe anymore.
They've been shown to be vulnerable to collision attacks. We've moved on to stronger algorithms like SHA-256 or SHA-3. It's that arms race again.
One more crypto thing for now. Salting. For passwords.
Yes, crucial for password storage. When you store a password, you don't store the password itself, you store a hash of it.
Right. But attackers have tables of pre-computed hashes for common passwords. Rainbow tables.
Exactly. If you just hash the password directly, they could look up the hash in their table and find the password.
So salting adds randomness.
Yes. Before hashing the password, you add a unique random string, the salt specific to that user.
So hash password plus salt.
Right. Now, even if two users have the same password, their stored hashes will be different because the salts are different.
And the rainbow tables don't work anymore because the attacker would need a separate table for every possible salt.
Which is computationally infeasible. Salting significantly raises the bar for cracking stolen password databases. It's a standard practice now.
Okay, so protocols set the rules, crypto provides the tools, but who gets to use the tools? Access control.
Precisely. How do we control who can access what information or resources?
This goes way back to early operating systems, right? Time-sharing systems needed to keep users separate.
Absolutely. Process isolation was key. And the sources differentiate between two main approaches.
DC and SE, discretionary and mandatory access control.
Right. DSC means the owner of a file or resource decides who gets access. Think standard file permissions on your laptop.
I own the file, I grant read-write access to my colleagues.
Exactly. MC is different. Access rules are set centrally, by policy, enforced by the system, often used in military or high-security environments. The user can't override the system's rules.
Got it. And how are these rules typically managed? ACLs are mentioned? Access control lists.
Yes, ACLs are common, especially in Unix-like systems. The list is attached to the resource, the file, the folder.
So the file has a list saying Alice can read, Bob can read-write, Charlie has no access.
That's the idea. It's pretty intuitive for users managing their own stuff.
But maybe inefficient if you have tons of users and resources, checking long lists all the time.
That can be a downside, yeah, especially for runtime checks.
So the alternative is capabilities.
Right. With capabilities, the access rights are attached to the user or process. A capability is like a token or ticket.
So instead of the file having a list, I have a token that says you can read file X.
Exactly. When you want to access file X, you present your capability token.
The sources say this is efficient at runtime. Just check the token.
Generally, yes. And delegation is easier. You can just give someone else a copy of your capability token.
But what if you want to revoke access? If copies of the token are floating around?
That's the challenge with capabilities. Revocation can be difficult. And tracking who has what capability can be tricky for audits.
Trade-offs everywhere.
Always. Security is full of them.
The sources also briefly mention HSM's hardware security modules.
Yes. Physical devices, basically hardened computers designed to protect cryptographic keys and perform sensitive operations.
Like banks protecting PINs. Because relying just on the operating system isn't always enough.
Especially against insiders. And HSM provides a physically secure, tamper-resistant environment isolated from the main OS. An extra layer of trust.
Okay, HSM sound robust. But let's shift gears a bit. We've talked tech, but what about us, the humans?
The weakest link. Often, yes. And passwords are the classic example.
Such a paradox, right? Totally essential, but also a huge source of problems.
The core issue is management. People just have too many passwords.
The sources cite a 2007 study feels old, but probably still relevant. Average user had like 6 or 7 passwords, would use them across maybe 25 different accounts. Password reuse is rampant.
We all know we shouldn't do it, but
It's hard not to. And websites like havebeenpn.com just show how often password databases get leaked. It's grim. Your password is probably out there somewhere.
likely. Which makes reuse even more dangerous.
And some security policies actually make things worse.
Counterintuitive, but true, like forcing password changes every month.
The sources mention university auditors insisting on this, even with no proof it helped.
Right. What usually happens, people just increment a number at the end or make a tiny change. Password 1, password 2.
Doesn't really improve security, just annoys people.
Exactly. Policies need to be evidence-based and consider usability.
There's a great historical case mention, RV Gold and Schifrin in the UK.
Oh yeah, the Prestel hack.
They found a maintenance password just displayed publicly.
On a terminal at an exhibition, I think, and used it to access the system, including the Duke of Edinburgh's email.
Wow. All from one password left lying around.
Led to the UK's first Computer Misuse Act, a landmark case showing the impact of basic password hygiene failures.
And it's not just end users, development teams sharing passwords.
Oh, it happens. Shared credentials for test systems, databases. Sometimes they even make it into production. Huge risk.
So what can systems do to fight back against password guessing? Rate control.
That's a key defense. Limit the number of login attempts per account in a given time.
Maybe even limit attempts from a specific IP address trying to hit many accounts.
Yes, both per account and per source IP rate limiting are common and effective against brute force attacks. Makes guessing too slow to be practical.
And we mentioned salting earlier with cryptography. That's vital here too.
Absolutely essential. Adding that unique salt before hashing stops attackers using pre-computed rainbow tables on stolen password databases, forces them to guess one password at a time per user, massively increases the cost of attack.
Okay, so technical fixes help, but the sources argue many failures aren't just technical.
Right. Economics and incentives play a huge role. Often, security fails because the incentives are wrong.
If the person building the system doesn't suffer when it gets hacked, why would they spend a lot on security?
Exactly. Who bears the cost of failure? If it's not the entity deploying the system, security might be underfunded. It's more than just cost accounting. It's about these perverse incentives.
And then there's social engineering. The human hack.
Kevin Mitnick's famous point.
Right?
Why bother with complex tech attacks if you can just call someone and trick them into giving you access?
Convincing someone to click a link, reveal a password, run a program.
Exploiting trust, helpfulness, sometimes fear. It often bypasses technical defenses entirely. User education is key, but it's a hard problem.
The sources go back to phone phreaking as an early example.
Yeah, manipulating the phone system with tones, blue boxes.
For making free calls, accessing things they shouldn't. It's fascinating that Jobs and Wozniak started out making those.
A bit of hacker history tied into the very beginnings of Apple. Shows how exploiting systems has always been around.
And early mobile phones, 1G, no voice encryption at all.
None. Anyone could listen in easily.
Yet criminals apparently liked them for the anonymity, using tumblers to change the phone's ID.
Right. Lack of privacy on one hand, but features enabling anonymity on the other. Strange mix.
Nowadays, the focus for scams has shifted more to apps, right?
Largely, yes. App stores, malicious apps, in-app scams. It's a complex ecosystem, harder to regulate than the old phone networks.
And the sources talk about the vulnerability lifecycle.
Yeah, the path a bug takes. Discovery, maybe secret use, then rediscovery, patching, then exploitation of unpatched systems.
A constant cycle. Someone finds a hole, maybe uses it quietly, then it becomes public, a patch comes out, but the race is on to patch before others exploit it.
Understanding that cycle is key for defense. Patching quickly is critical.
And all these systems are getting more connected, blurring the lines.
Definitely. Smart meters talking to the grid, phones being used for authentication everywhere, infrastructure relying on mobile networks.
It creates new dependencies, new potential failure points. One system hack can cascade.
Holistic security becomes even more vital. You can't just secure silos anymore.
The UK's smart meter rollout is mentioned as a tough example.
Yeah, a huge project where security seems to have been bolted on late, led to cost overruns, problems.
Shows the importance of building security in from the start, not as an afterthought.
A hard lesson learned, often repeated.
And with all this interconnectedness, even basic things like naming and identity get tricky.
In distributed systems, yeah. You can't always rely on one central place to manage all the names and know who's who. Trust becomes more complex.
Okay, last big area the sources touch on. Surveillance and privacy. Always a tension there.
A constant balancing act throughout history, especially with new tech. The sources mention U.S. wiretapping laws evolving over time.
From Olmsted, where wiretaps weren't considered a search, to CATS establishing privacy expectations, then FISA, ECPA.
Reflecting society grappling with how to allow necessary surveillance while protecting privacy rights as technology changed.
And whistleblowers have played a big role in revealing the extent of surveillance.
People like Needham, Winterbotham historically, more recently Newsham, Snowden, their disclosures brought capabilities into the public eye.
Snowden's revelations, for instance, led to a big jump in internet traffic encryption.
That's what the data suggests, yes.
Yeah.
Public awareness spurred technical changes.
The sources also note things like crypto export controls as political tools.
Limiting access to strong encryption for geopolitical reasons.
And the rise of data protection laws like GDPR in Europe or CCPA in California.
Societal responses trying to give individuals more control over their personal data in this digital world, setting rules for collection and processing.
So, wrapping this all up, it's clear security engineering is incredibly broad.
It really is. It's not just algorithms or protocols in isolation.
It's the tech, yes, but also the people, the economics, the incentives, the societal context. It all has to work together.
A truly holistic view is essential for effective security. You have to consider all those pieces.
Absolutely. And looking ahead, with technology blurring physical and digital lines even more and AI becoming so integrated, it poses a big question, doesn't it?
A huge one.
How do we make sure security keeps pace? How do we protect individuals and society from threats we know about and maybe threats we haven't even conceived of yet?
And crucially, how do we do that while still balancing security needs with fundamental privacy rights and, frankly, just making things usable for people?
That's the challenge. Finding that balance in a rapidly changing world, something for all of us to think about.